Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Breakfast Clubbers. It is my great pleasure to speak today with our dear friend, longtime associate and fellow member, Janice Litvin. And today we'll be talking about her new book, Banish Burnout Toolkit. And I'm tremendously excited to hear more about her story, not only about the book, but what it took for her to make the book. So today we're going to have a conversation with our good friend and author of the Banish Burnout Toolkit. And from what Patricia had said about her situation this morning, it seems like it's a perfect meeting for her to be attending today. So terrific and good for you, Patricia. I'm going to put this over here. Whoop. And now, let's see here, and then we'll do this here. And then, good. Okay, so what I like to do here is just, first of all, let's tell you, Janice Litvin is on a mission to help leaders and teams banish burnout in their organizations. And she does this through keynote speeches, workshops, and accountability groups. And as an award-winning speaker, certified virtual presenter, and official SHRM recertification provider, she wants to help as many people as possible take care of their physical and mental health, including teaching them how to manage stress, prevent burnout, fall in love with fitness, and eat healthier. She got us all moving up and down about 3 years ago here. I remember even standing next to Bill Buchanan, our very macho, perhaps our most macho breakfast clubber here, and he's doing the moves to Janice's Zumba class here, and that was a whole lot of fun, Bill. I remember that very much. I felt more in touch with my feminine side as a result of that here and being with Bill, and that was just tremendous. So thank you, Bill, for that experience. We're not going to talk to Claire about that here, but that's between you and me. In these ways, Janice is helping people to change their lives. She's helped develop unique strategies to maximize engagement in workplace wellness, and has also developed a stress management methodology available through her workbook, Banish Burnout Toolkit. You might be interested to know is that Janice, in addition to SHRM in Northern California, she's worked with a wide range of other clients to present wellness workshops and programs, including the Professionals and Human Resources Association, the Cal SAE, which is the California Society of Association Executives, Coral Reef Alliance, San Mateo Unified High School District, Wellwright, Minnesota State SHRM Council, that was a very cold meeting, and the NCHRA, Next Concept Human Resources Association, First Republic Bank, Robert Half, Cities of Walnut Creek, and Sunnyvale, and USHHS. Please, Breakfast Clubber, give a warm welcome to our very own Janice Litvin.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Antonio. I feel so important now. Thank you.
Janice, it's tremendous here. We're going to have a lot of fun here talking about your project here. But what I would love to do, if we could just get started with this, is I'd love to talk with you about the origin story. What is your origin story for this book? From my perspective, you are probably one of the most energetic, thoughtful, productive people around. And I can't even imagine the idea of you dealing with burnout. How did you come upon the topic of burnout to begin with?
It's a funny thing. There's so many stories. I grew up with, though I love my parents very much, I grew up with a very critical, perfectionistic mother. And thankfully, she was so critical and perfectionistic, she gave me something to speak about and write about in my speeches. And so while I was writing the book, I was actually learning, even though I did go to therapy in the 80s like everybody, and I peeled back so many layers of the onion, there's always more. And so I realized during the process of writing and researching the book that I still had some limiting beliefs, and they came from a variety of situations, such as, that homework is messy, start over, it has to be perfect. You're going out in that? Orange is not your color. You made all A's last semester. Why aren't you making all A's this semester? Your brother makes all A's. And so when you constantly criticize and undermine a child's confidence, they begin to develop limiting beliefs. And I thank my mother for giving me all those limiting beliefs, because now I had a great learning topic for my book and my speeches.
Well, that makes a lot of sense now, and why you had dedicated the book to your mother Sylvia and your father Robert. So that makes perfect sense here. Did your father have any involvement here with this idea with addressing burnout?
Oh, absolutely. When I was doing homework with my father was actually the one that said your homework is too messy, and he would sit next to me doing math homework, and he would actually take his knuckle and punch me in the arm if my erasures were too messy. Even though I had a very fond feeling towards my father, there was a lot of pushing, I should say.
A lot of pushing. Well, okay, so moving forward into your professional career here, and first of all, how long have you been working on this project for?
That's also a funny story. Because of National Speakers Association and Patricia Fripp, I used to hear this message over and over. You got to write a book to build credibility. Although I didn't do the accent right. So in 2017, I started a book about workplace wellness, but it wasn't getting done and it wasn't getting done. And I would write a while and then I would stop and I would write a while. And I realized later it was because I wasn't inspired and I didn't have a unique point of view. One day, my brilliant son, who was then 26, and I think you all met one day when Michael Hague came, and my son had read some of his stories. One day we were chatting about my social media and my marketing, and I already had developed this program called Banish Burnout. And he said, "Mom, why aren't you writing a book called Banish Burnout?" And it was so simple that I felt stupid, like, duh, why didn't I write a book? So I called my editor. I said, guess what? We're scrapping the first book. We're changing gears. And we began right away on the Banish Burnout program and book. And within 5 months, I had my first draft ready, 3 months of editing. And then finally, we got it out on Amazon last October.
Well, congratulations on that. I want to go right into the book at this point, and one of the questions here is just defining burnout. You know, the idea of, what's the difference between burnout and being tired, or burnout and being fed up? Can you give us a little bit of an insight for what you mean by burnout as it defined in this book?
Well, I'll tell you not only what I mean by burnout, but the World Health Organization declared that burnout was a syndrome caused by too much workplace stress that has gone unaccounted for and unfixed. And so when you have employees that either have lack of control over their work, fear of losing their job, too much work, not enough support, over and over and over again, and they come to work frustrated and angry and negated and not listened to and not valued, they begin to lose their passion for their job. And sooner or later, they feel burned out and they're looking for another job on company time.
And so how can organizations spot this? You had mentioned in your book this idea of an audit of some sort. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yes, we can. Thank you. The stress audit is part of tool number 1. And let me back it up a tiny bit. Tool number 1 is actually 2 halves, stop and audit. Stop stands for stop, take a deep breath, which is really a cleansing breath, observe, and then proceed. This was developed by John Kabat-Zinn, who is considered the father of modern day mindfulness. When you do the observe part, then you work on your stress audit, which helps you begin to analyze your patterns of stress response. Those patterns are etched in from childhood, either from parents or teachers or peers. And so it helps to write with a pen and paper what happened, how you felt emotionally and physically, what you did verbally, what your exacerbating behavior was, which means how upset did you get and how long did you stay there? And then did you engage in any potential addictive behavior? Favorite is ice cream. And there, as you know, there are many others. And so when you begin to work the stress audit, you begin to see your patterns. And that's the first step to behavior change, is getting awareness, as you all know.
I love. So talk about this concept of spinning your stress here and understanding the type of stress that you're dealing with. Can you understand, what do you mean by spinning your stress? How do we know what kind of stress that we're dealing with?
Well, first of all, there is something in psychology called a closed mindset or a negative mindset. And then there's on the other side, a growth mindset. So when we reality spin, let me give you an example. You come out in the morning and it's very cold, you're on the East Coast and your car won't start. And you've got an important meeting at work and you start to look at your clock and you're upset and you're pacing around and stomping and you start to overreact. Then you start to think extreme thoughts like, oh my gosh, now I'm going to have to buy a new car. I'm going to get fired. You start to get all these overwhelming, overreactive thoughts. So what the reality spin does, and this is part of why the stress audit is so important, you have to stop and take the thoughts from the amygdala, the fear part of the brain, and move them over to the prefrontal cortex. That's the science behind the reality spin, and say to yourself, well, let me get into the solution rather than the fear. Let me think about how am I going to get to work, worry about the car later. Either tow the car, call Uber, get to work, and know that, no, I'm not going to get fired. I'm a valued employee. My boss might be annoyed if I'm late, but maybe I'll call and text the boss and say, I'm on my way. I might be 5 minutes late. I'm taking an Uber. So it has to do with grabbing control of your thoughts and not letting them run away like a rampant train.
You talked about the idea of the neural pathway. I'm just out of curiosity, is this something that you create an actual deep neural pathway that gets embedded over time as far as if you're dealing with burnout? Can this feeling get stronger and stronger over time as a result of this kind of shortcut that the brain makes to deal with this stress?
Yes, absolutely. So for those who don't know, a neural pathway is your pattern of behavior. For example, here's a simplistic example. When you were a child and someone gave you a compliment, your parent probably said, what do you say? And you said, thank you. And then the other person said, you're welcome. That's a pattern or a neural pathway in the brain. When you get upset, the normal reaction based on your history is that you overreact. But when you grab control, you can create new patterns. And I'll tell you a quick story of how to illustrate this. I was going to my son's girlfriend's birthday party, and I knew she wanted a particular gift card. So I didn't have a lot of time. I set myself up negatively, but I didn't have a lot of time to go and get this gift card. I had gone to the gym. I had to get to the store and get the gift card. I actually called the store. They said they had the gift card. I went to the store and it was a huge, huge Safeway. I stomp around looking for the gift card, can't find the darn gift card. And now I'm looking at my clock, my watch, and I'm in a hurry and I'm getting frustrated. And I started negating the people in the store in my brain. This was my pattern, and now I'm working on it, which I hope all of you will learn today. And I started saying to myself, oh my gosh, these people are so stupid. How come they told me they had the gift card? I'm never going to get there on time. They're going to be mad at me. I'm going to let these people know. And so as I'm stomping around to the front of the store, having this little dialogue, I stopped, took my breath, and said to myself, wait a minute, these people are not at fault. Maybe you just can't find the gift card. Maybe you can choose to be happy and polite and say to the person, hi, how's your day going? I'm in trouble here. Can you please help me find the gift card? This is an absolutely true story. And so that is stop in action, stopping, catching yourself in the act of negativity and spinning it into positivity. And as you practice, just like exercise or yoga or meditation, as you practice, it gets easier and easier and easier, and you catch yourself sooner and sooner.
So is this tied, when I think about this topic, I think about the Denver airport that's very well known for having problems with baggage, like we all do in life in many cases here, and unpacking that baggage and dealing with your baggage is really important here. Can you talk a little bit about how you unpack emotional baggage?
Wow, that's a very big topic, and it's too intense for this time of day and this audience. However, I will talk about it. So my NSA friend, Dr. Elaine Savage, wrote a book called, now I can't remember the name of the book. I pulled it out yesterday. I'll tell you the name later. So what she has taught is that when you go back and dig deep into those childhood experiences that I talked about earlier with my perfectionism parents, some people are walking around with unresolved emotional baggage. And the way you can tell is when they overreact. For example, I'll give you a quick story. I was at a meeting one day and it was too hot or too cold in the room. And I grabbed another member and said, do you think we could turn down, fix the temperature? And she started banging on the buttons. And I said, hey, wait a minute. I don't think all that banging on the buttons is going to do it. I think we need to stop and read the screen. And she said, you shouldn't be so critical when someone's trying to help you. So instantly I knew something was amiss. And I said to myself, that person has not unpacked her emotional baggage. So when you see someone overreact and give a reaction that doesn't match what is happening, that person has not gone back and resolved that maybe they didn't get enough attention from their parent, or the parent was too critical, or whatever, some overly critical teacher in school, whatever the issues are, someone hasn't gotten over it.
Okay, well, then let's move on a little bit here to, if we can identify these areas here, and we're starting to think about this a little bit, now we want to start practicing self-care. And maybe we can talk about just a couple little tips or ideas regarding self-care and dealing with burnout that you could share with us.
Sure. So most people think of self-care as physical self-care, and that certainly is part of it. And you all know I love to dance and I love to move and I love to get outside. I think Patricia Fripp was at my meeting where I talked about getting out in the sun and the value of sunshine. But self-care is also about mental self-care. And so something that I've been thinking about lately is called Find Your Happy. And what that means is throughout the day, little nice things happen. Like someone might give you a compliment, noticed you got a haircut, or someone might say, well, I really liked that report you wrote. Or you might finish a big report and you can give yourself a compliment. Oh, phew, I finally finished that big, difficult project. Every time you have a tiny little positive throughout the day, I want you to magnify it and I want you to blow that out of proportion so that you can give yourself a pat on the back and find a moment of happiness, because the brain loves it. The brain loves to be happy, and you have to help it acknowledge that something happened that is a positive.
I love that example. Sometimes as just dealing with work and so on, all the different activities, sometimes I'll have a YouTube on and I'll watch a little comedians talking about throughout the day here when I take little breaks. And that's something that definitely helps to relax a little bit and enjoy these parts and get back to work. So these little.
And I would add to that, I talk about my son a lot because he's, of course, adorable because he's my son, but also I feel he's wise beyond his years. Every now and then, so my son is in one room, my husband's in another, and I'm in a third. Every now and then we come out and we have a moment, and my son gets me laughing, and then my husband, thank God, is cooking lunch or dinner, and we have a moment of joy and laughter. Find moments of joy. Even in the pandemic, you can find joy and laughter throughout the day, little sparks of happiness throughout the day.
I love it. How important is sleep here? We're all working so very hard and there's so much activity going on, especially dealing with the pandemic and people working so difficult, in such difficult situations here. How important is it for sleep as it applies to burnout?
Well, absolutely. As a lot of you probably know, sleep affects mood, mental clarity. I don't know how Patricia Fripp can get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I know the day that I had to get up at 5 and speak for a 6 o'clock session, I had to really turn on my brain. So there's a lot of research that shows that shift workers who work graveyards, such as nurses, truck drivers, even pilots, anybody that is sleeping against the clock, the body releases hormones during the day to wake you up and hormones in the afternoon to get you to sleep. And when you're on the opposite clock, the body has to work so much harder to make you clear. And so it's really important to get 7 to 8 hours a night of sleep, as I'm sure a lot of you know.
In your first part of your discussion, you had mentioned about the employee that doesn't really feel in control and stuck, which reminds me of your book about the idea of expressing yourself. Can we talk a little bit here about how important self-expression is in this process?
Absolutely. Your partner, your bosses, your friends don't know what you're thinking if you don't tell them. I remember hearing years ago where someone said to me, well, my husband should know what I want for Christmas. And I'm like, how? Can they read your mind? So communicating your needs is really important. And this also brings up the topic of setting healthy boundaries. So in in one sense, setting healthy boundaries is about saying no. It's okay to say no to a friend. And if they don't like it, that's them. That's not you. The other thing about setting healthy boundaries in a work situation is not necessarily about saying no. It's about letting the boss know that you're juggling 8 piles. And some bosses are not as organized as others. Some don't know exactly what you're working on or how long it's taking. So sometimes it's about saying, I would love to work on that new project. That sounds so exciting. Which of these other projects would you like me to stop working on? Or would you like to offload some of this or change our deadline? So it's about communicating your situation so that you can feel a little bit more in control. And that takes the anger and the bite out of the situation.
I love that. I love that insight. And it leads me to this idea of actually planning your day or planning your time. And I'm just curious, how much time do you actually spend in planning your time throughout the course of the week or the month? Could you share a little bit about that?
About once a month, I make a long list of every single little thing that I try to get done, and then I prioritize them. And the fantasy is that I fit them perfectly on my schedule. Of course, things come up. Someone called me while I was in Reno last week and said, I'm writing an article for Forbes. Would you like to comment? So of course I had to stop everything and get that done. He gave me like a 5-hour window. And I'm like, of course I want to be quoted in Forbes. So you have to leave room for yourself, leave flexibility in your schedule that if it's not perfect, it's okay. So my brilliant son says, write a list of 3 to 5 items, a power list every day, and then actually cross them off. So you get that spark of happiness. Hey, I completed my day.
That's a very good point. So the idea, but what's the difference between structured time and loose time? So that, for instance, you're already very busy, you're engaged in lots of activities, and here comes this opportunity for Forbes. So you could just stay in Reno and be hanging out and having fun, say, I'm in family time, but then you say, well, look, this is a great business opportunity. I'm going to stop this family time, which is part of your relaxing, and take advantage of this business opportunity. How do you deal with that level of balance as far as making decisions like that?
Well, I mean, the basics of it are prioritization, of course. Of course, my husband, thank God, is very flexible. And he said, that's okay, I'm going to go out and take a walk. And he took a 3-mile walk to our friend's house and got to know parts of Reno we didn't even know. So that was, he figured out how to have fun out of it. I was happy because I'm going to be quoted in Forbes, of course. And so it's a matter of just being flexible and not being super rigid about your schedule and in effect your life and letting things go.
That's a really critical thing because so many people that are very high performing people are very rigid in their schedules, and it's very difficult to schedule the time. If there's any late meetings or what have you, it's very difficult. So are you saying that too structured a schedule can also cause burnout as well? Is that possible?
Yes, if it's to the point where you can't say yes to something that happens in the middle of the day. I mean, back when we were in the office, if somebody said, come on, let's go to lunch, and you're busy finishing something that really isn't due, you're missing a very important part of your day if you're not socializing. Socialization is a huge part of mental health and mental wellness. Loneliness in the workplace has become a huge, huge issue. Of course, now it's even worse, but what we have filled it up with is all these Zoom meetings. And one thing I've learned from hours and hours and hours of Zoom meetings all day, all week, all month, is to set up blocks of time where I have no meetings so that I can get my power list done.
It seems like freedom is really an important feeling, or at least experience to have in order to combat burnout and to banish burnout. How important is that feeling of freedom in your mind as you're making suggestions to people to help them deal with this?
It's a huge, huge part of burnout. As I mentioned before, loss of control causes a lot of fear and anxiety. And in a professional organization, hopefully you have as much freedom as you're able to have. And without that freedom, you're nothing as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. Well, let's talk about helping people take action for banishing burnout. And one of the things that you say that's really important is getting an accountability partner. Can we talk just for a moment about accountability partners and helping you to banish burnout?
Absolutely. So as many of you already know, accountability parties or a good friend or a best friend at work, however you want to define it, is so important because sometimes you need to role play that difficult conversation, or you need to just let off steam. Maybe you grab a friend and said, oh, I'm so angry. Did you see what so-and-so did or said? And go have coffee and let it off. So accountability partners can be a friend at work. can be a mentor, someone you look up to. It can be even be a coach that you pay to help you when you're all off on your own trying to accomplish a business. I know many of you are entrepreneurs. It's important to have someone to bounce ideas off of, because we get stuck in this little box called our head. And sometimes you need to get out of your head because you need to make sure you're on the right path for what you're trying to accomplish.
I love it. You know, folks, stress is an inevitable and necessary part of life, as one of the quotes from your book says here, but it can also be motivating as well. And if you are interested in learning how to combat stress and banish burnout, you have the Banish Burnout Toolkit from our very dear friend and fellow member, Janice Litvin. Janice, thank you so very much for your presentation today. We're so happy for you.
And I'm deeply appreciative of you, Pitchfreak, Antonio. Thank you so much for that amazing interview. Very unique.
My great pleasure. And perhaps we have some questions, Mr. President.
Well, first of all, thank you, Janice, and thank you, Antonio, for just the presentation. It was wonderful, and Antonio, great questions, and Janice, great answers. So
thank you,
let's open it up for some questions. If anyone would like to ask, feel free to raise your hand. I'll try my best to monitor. We also have the ability to raise our hand through the function on Zoom. So
I think I saw some chats popping up. I'm not sure if they were questions or comments or what.
I think Eldon had some observations. Why don't we start with Patricia? I see she's got both hands raised at the moment.
Great job, Janice and Antonio. Really very good. A lot resonated. The reason I could get up at 4 o'clock is because I made myself not exercise at the end of the day. I drank my Zoom Calmie drink, had a hot bath, and went to bed before 10 o'clock.
Yes.
And I didn't watch TV, which is my normal fun habit. I love to watch TV before I go to sleep, so I didn't do that. I really commend the idea, and it's only recently I have blocked time for big projects. Mm-hmm. My question of you is, you are the expert and you catch yourself. Oh, I'm doing this, I'm overreacting, they're not idiots in the store. If you were to give us one first step to be able to control our immediately getting over it emotional, especially if someone else is irritating you, what would it be?
It's a practice, just like yoga and healthy eating, and working the first step, the stop and audit, and learning every day to stop yourself and practice the stress audit is a journaling process. When you journal, Daniel Pink said, and everybody says, when you journal, especially with pen and paper or pencil, things come out that you don't know are bothering you. And when you start to understand your own mind and where those problems come from, then you can begin to change them. And so it's a matter of just being aware that I would like to be a happier person. I would like to not be so critical. I would like to not be so mean to people in the store. I mentioned my dear departed mother, but when we were children, she would scream at people in the store, the checker at the grocery store or whatever. I remember one day when I was a little girl, you'll appreciate this story, and I had very long hair, and we had some event going on, probably for one of her synagogue fundraisers. And so she took me to the beauty shop and had them do my hair, and she wanted it done in spit curls. For anybody who doesn't remember, there where you roll them up and put the clip in. When she came to pick me up, they hadn't done the spit curls. They had used these rollers because it was easier. She screamed and yelled and berated everybody in the beauty shop. Of course, I'm a little girl. I'm embarrassed. I mean, to this day, I remember the situation. So that was my role modeling. That's how I grew up, yelling and screaming at people and just being irritated and negative. And I realized one day, she and I were at a bar mitzvah party on the East Coast. And I remember one day her being really angry that two of the cousins were talking and she wasn't included. But because I had moved away from home and then seen her behavior, I realized I didn't want to be that person anymore. I didn't want to be unhappy. My son had even said, Mom, you stay really angry when you get really upset. So it took another person to help me realize how negative my behavior was. And it's not just my behavior, it was my negative thoughts. So it's the becoming aware of who you are and that you want to change, and then working the stress audit.
I think it's nice that your son Lee you get so much good feedback from him, and he's the reason he had the title. He pointed out the title of your book too.
Yes, thank you for remembering his name, Craig. I really appreciate that.
Okay, Stephen Campbell. Oh, Stephen, your microphone's off.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much for what you say. It lines up with everything that we know about the brain. A couple of really interesting comments. When we purposely lie, perspiration shows up on our palm of hand, and we're attached to a lie detector machine. We short the machine out. That's how lie detectors work. There's such a connection between your brain and your hand while you're writing. And that's the connection there. So when you're writing, your brain's just going crazy. Another really interesting observation that you talked about was the importance of sleep. The only time that the brain has to make sense of all the stuff that you gave it during the day is when you're sleeping. Because during the day, you're given all what you're thinking, feeling, touching, smelling. It can't keep up. So when you finally go to sleep, the brain says, great, now I'm going to make sense of all the stuff that you gave me during the day. So the importance of sleep was wonderful. So thank you for talking about that.
I'd like to add, I didn't talk a lot about physiological reactions to stress, and Stephen, you'll relate to this, and I hope everyone else will too. When you're stressed, let's say you're in a meeting and you give a suggestion and someone says, oh no, we can't do it that way. That won't work for us. And you feel defeated. Your body will tell you when you're upset. You'll either get elevated heart rate. I get knots in my stomach. Some people get a clenched jaw, or they start to shake. People have even told me they get rashes. So sometimes your physiological reaction is the only indicator that you're upset, because you're in a meeting and you're trying to hold your cool. After the meeting, you can go work the stress audit and start to notice what upset you. If you don't pay attention to how you feel, then you will explode like Draymond Green, our beloved warrior, who often gets thrown out of the game because he yells and screams at the refs. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Stephen.
Steve Budd.
Steve Budd.
Wonderful presentation, Janice, and in the interview format with the Pitchfreak, it was fantastic. I just want to say, I just noticed the connection between what you were talking about and origin stories, which I love to talk about, and seeing the origin story in a way, you talking about your mother, what your mother was like, the impact she had on you, the way you were as a kid, and then tracing that to your adult behavior and seeing how you can change that. So that's a great way to use the origin story and talking about banishing burnout.
Thank you. I was thinking about you and Patricia, Fripp, and Michael Haig when I try to sprinkle my answers with my stories.
Oh, great.
So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Who else do we have? Bill Buchanan, and then I think Tim Durkin had a question too. Bill?
Good morning, Janice. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
And as you went through your presentation, I was thinking to myself, what in Janice's background, experiences, her education led her to write a book about such a complex topic, knowing that if she's successful, she's going to be peer reviewed, she's going to be exposed to international audiences with experts on the topic. What was it in your background and education that gave you the courage to attack that kind of a topic?
Thank you. That's such an amazing, insightful question. My mother, again, and I know a lot of you are impacted by your mothers. My mother told me, you're going to major in math or computer science because a woman in tech will always find a job. And that's absolutely true. I found my first job, which was at Bank of America in San Francisco, 1 South Van Ness, for those who remember, the computer center where Visa was born. the Visa card.
Oh.
I did get that job within 3 days on my spring break trip interviewing at Bank of America. So I did take that job. I loved the people, but I realized I did not like computer programming. And so that's kind of a related and unrelated answer to your question. So all the stories and how my life has progressed and how my parents have reacted. Originally, I really wanted to major in psychology, but my mother said, "Oh no, you can't major in psychology. You won't be making enough money. You've got to be in tech." So I took her advice. She was a recruiter at the time in oil and gas in Houston. And so I thought, well, she's my mother. She must know something. And yes, I want to be independent and I want to be self-sufficient. So I did take that tech track. But what I learned along the way is that I liked the people. And so I became a tech trainer, a tech consultant, and eventually a tech recruiter for 20 plus years. After tech recruiting dried up, I had to figure out something else to do. We had the recession in 2008. I couldn't figure out what to do. So I went to the gym and got in shape. That's where I found Zumba. Love, as you all know, love teaching Zumba. Susan RoAne loves doing Zumba with me every single week, twice a week. And so what happened after that is I couldn't figure out what to do with Zumba. I wanted to bring the ideas to the corporate world, which was my bailiwick, but I didn't quite know what to do about it. And I went to lunch with an international Zumba trainer and aerobic star named Pepper Vaughn in Sacramento, who has his own studio and his own business. And he said, well, what is it that you haven't done in your life that you still want to do? And I said, I want to become a professional speaker. And just like that story with my son coming up with the name of the book, it took going to lunch with someone else to figure out that I wanted to be a professional speaker. A lot of people don't know that I was a member of NSA in the 80s when Patricia Fripp was the first female national president. And I was a technical trainer in those days. And I thought, I will never be able to become a motivational speaker. Then later on, I dropped out of NSA because I got married, had a baby. And as you know, now he's 26. And I came back to speaking because of that lunch with my friend Pepper Vaughn. And so as I was speaking, I was mostly speaking about fitness, as you all saw on Valentine's Day 3 years ago. But one day, a company called me up and said, we want you to do a talk about stress, but we don't want the typical mindfulness meditation. We want to go deep. And I was like, you do? I can go as deep as you want. So I had done a lot of research into cognitive behavior therapy, which is the underlying backbone of my process, developed by Dr. Albert Ellis in New York in the 60s. But I also had a lot, yes, Stephen, I also had a lot of my own experience. And I think I was worried that that experience wasn't credibility, but indeed it was, because that is where I've learned to change my own behavior. And is that experience, strength, and hope that I can give to other people? Because if I can change, so can you.
All right, excellent. Tim Durkin.
Well, Janice, that was a superb presentation. As you know, I bought your book early on, and I actually worked the workbook. All right, so that's why it's. I'm not holding it up. I keep it in a drawer and I work it. But I couldn't help thinking, because about half of my work is in healthcare, and just last week I saw a study that I pray is wrong, but it said when this COVID crisis is over, 60% of the nurses and 20% of the physicians plan to leave the professions. And it's burnout. And one of the biggest issues is what you mentioned, is lack of control. They just feel like they have no control. Even deciding when and what to eat is some semblance of control, and they don't know when they're going to eat again. So I just want to commend you for your work. I think it's really wonderful. And I see a very, very large need for it in healthcare. And I have no idea. I know Antonio is a marketing genius. Maybe he knows how to get it to healthcare, but think about the crisis if more than half the nurses leave.
Yes, there's a huge physician and nurse burnout is a huge issue. I've read a lot about it, and I know a couple of physicians have become burnout experts because they're trying to help their field. And talking about graveyard shift, physicians often have to be, when they're interns, I believe it is, if there are any doctors in the audience, please correct me. They often have to be on, so to speak, for 24 or 36 hours. I don't remember what the exact numbers are, but that's the worst thing you can do, not only to them, but to just think about the patients of a doctor working on lack of sleep and nurses working from midnight to 7 a.m. Your body doesn't want to be awake at night. I know we need nurses at graveyard shift, but it's very difficult for your body to have to work against the biological clock. And by the way, I want to point out that Tim Durkin was the first person to review my book on Amazon. So thank you so much. And also to thank Patricia, Fripp, and Susan RoAne for endorsing the book inside the book. I deeply, deeply appreciate all the support.
Janice, I have a question for you. Maybe you could just speak a little bit about humor and how that helps us banish our own burnout.
Well, to answer that question, I need to bring Steve Budd back to the forefront, because if it weren't for humor, if it weren't for being able to laugh at ourselves and look at the humor in our relationships, Steve can do a number from his show. What is the name of your show, Steve Budd?
I can't remember right now. It's What They Said About Love.
So give us a little bit of relationship humor.
Like, Val, what do you want to hear from me right now? I don't know anything about relationships. No, but actually, can I share some piece of wisdom, because this relates to something you were talking about, Janice, earlier, which is one of the people I interviewed when I created the show. I interviewed a bunch of couples, and I played the couples in the show. One of the women that I interviewed, married woman, said, one of the ways she handles it when she starts to get irritated by her husband is the way she handles it, she asks herself, what is it about me that's getting annoyed? So rather than blaming him, she looks at herself and says, what's it about me? Why am I getting annoyed? Why am I getting irritated? And she works on herself rather than taking it out on her husband. So that's an interesting insight that I think would be hard to master for a lot of people, but it'd be great. I think using that STOP formula you talked about would be essential in a case like that.
When I was in college, I took an adolescent psychology class from a brilliant Canadian psychologist who used to act out the Jewish mother. Oh, that's okay. I'll be okay home alone, sitting in the dark, waiting for you to come home. You go on and have a good time. I'll be okay. I'll be all alone in the dark. So when he used to act out all these Jewish mother, and he was Jewish, all these Jewish mother routines, I realized my mother is a syndrome. It made me realize that it wasn't just my mother, that there was a psychological syndrome in there. And because I could laugh, it relaxed me enough to look at my own life. And because of that, I did go and seek out support from him and his team.
Well, do we have any other questions? Anybody else?
I'd like to add something.
Please.
It's Anastasia. So two things. One is, of course, encouraging everyone to get the book. I'm going to get one for my niece, but I also have a friend here who's the head of the ER of the hospital in our area and has a lot of stress. So I'm going to get one for him. But I want to just kind of point out, Tim reviewing your book, and from the viewpoint of an agent, I will say that when people, if they're doing their due diligence and really looking at a potential speaker, if they're doing their due diligence, they're going to look at their book and see if their book is good or not. So having reviews for an author is one of the greatest things you could ever do for that person, not only because it help them get more visibility and further up on the list as far as being, suggested books and things like that. It helps more people buy their book, but it also helps them get booked to speak more often. Because if somebody's got a crap book and that's their topic, you don't want them. So I'm just saying, to help Janice out, just go ahead and find her book. And after you've read it, of course, you know, transparency, truth, authenticity. But always in any book, Stephen Campbell's book, if you've read it, go in and review it. It's one of the best things you can ever do for any author. Just saying, especially if they're speaking.
Great.
I
Thanks,
deeply
Anastasia.
appreciate that. Thank you so much, Anastasia.
All right, Paul Coleman has a question. Paul, why don't you wrap it up because we're at the bottom of the hour now.
Okay, thank you, Craig. I'll be quick. Janice, that was an excellent presentation. Thank you. I'm just quite intrigued. Listened intently with the point about the influence of your mother. I just wanted to turn around the other way, because as a parent, of two grown-up children, I can see my standards and my behaviors repeated in my children, including the same sort of point that you've made of losing your temper in a shop because they didn't have it, or et cetera, and thinking afterwards, well, what a waste of time, you know, because it's not their fault. But now what I am seeing, and I'm interested on this part, is 2 grandchildren. And I see, when I'm in the presence of my son, particularly, because he's the father of 2 grandchildren, obviously, but he plays back some of the things that I do in the front of his children, or I did in front of his children. And it just seems like it's a self-repeating process in a family without realizing, because of course I never thought I was guiding my children into being argumentative in a shop, or they didn't get their own way, and you know, something that it's not their fault sort of style. So I'm just intrigued, just quickly, and I appreciate Craig's point, just quickly, you know, is that the sort of pattern do you see that's repeated?
Absolutely. It's the role modeling. And I think I told you the story of being at a bar mitzvah party with my mother and observing her behavior. We role model the behavior that we're taught. So it's really important to be aware of what you're doing, what you're saying, your tone of voice, your kindness, and how you treat the people around you, your children, your coworkers, your family, your spouse. And yes, we all have a bad day, but how critical are you when you come home and you've been on a trip and your adult son leaves the kitchen a mess? How are you going to react? Are you going to yell and scream and say, why didn't you clean the kitchen? Or are you going to say, thank you for taking care of the house, and look for the positives instead of always looking for the negatives? And I think that was one of the biggest lessons I learned and became aware of in looking at my relationships with my parents, is that they were always looking for the negative. Always, like, for example, I had a client call me up one day, and she realized that when she came home with a 93, her mother always said, well, what happened to the other 7 points? Well, what about, good job, you worked so hard, you made a 93, it's an A. How about congratulations on the hard work you did put in? Or we went to a piano recital one day, I'll never forget, of a friend's daughter, and there was a woman screaming at her son, who was one of the kids in the recital, for not being perfect enough. And she's screaming in front of all these other people. That was my mother yelling in public. And it makes the child afraid, upset. They begin to lose confidence. And that's where they begin to develop limiting beliefs, because they're afraid, but yet you're their guide. You're their unconditional love. You're their support. And when you exhibit negative behavior, they don't know anything else. That's the home they grew up in. So it's really important to watch how we speak to people and our tone of voice.
Well, thank you, Janice.
Thank you, Craig. And by the way, thank you, Craig, for your post on LinkedIn. Craig actually put a video on LinkedIn yesterday with the book. I deeply, deeply appreciate your support.
That was my pleasure. That was a lot of fun. I hope you get some more book sales out of that effort.
And speaking gigs too.
Yeah. All right. So, well, I'd like to just go ahead and call this particular meeting to an end, and we'll keep the room open until 9 if anyone wants to chat or has some further questions. But again, Janice, thank you so much for your presentation today.
Thank you so much. I was so looking forward to this, and it was really a lot of fun. And Antonio, thank you deeply for your very, very insightful, thought-provoking interview. Very unusual.
Yeah, that was wonderful. I mean, you came up with some questions that I thought were just spectacular. And it was amazing. So,
And I also want to give a public acknowledgement to Susan RoAne for being ready, willing, and able to jump in as my Plan B interviewer.
Oh, really? I only practiced your introduction 10 times.
all right. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And oh, by the way, next week, let me just look at my notes here. We've got a couple speakers. Ray Ingen is going to be talking next week. He's a comedian. And then we have Gary Whitestone on March 10th. Tracy Hooper is going to be with us on March 17th. And then we have Paul Coleman, who's going to be with us on March 24th. So
And March 31st, my good friend Edward Siegel, the Forbes contributor and interviewer, will be talking about how to respond to a crisis. He's quite intelligent and quite fun to listen to.
and where's he going to be highlighted at?
He's going to be our speaker March 31st.
Oh, okay, March 30. Oh, 31st. All right, that's fantastic. Thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, you guys have a great rest of the day. Nice seeing everybody.
Bye. Have a great week. See y'all next week.
Thank you.
Well, that was a lot of fun.
Super fun. Great job, Mr. President.
That was fast.